Good day, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Welcome to another Live with Kevin on what day is this? Wednesday morning in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I am. But you know where I am, but I don't know where you are. So if you're with us here live, why don't you start by saying hello, telling us where you're located. Just use the comment section, whatever social platform you're on, to do that. I'd love to know. I know that my guest would love to know as well. And I have another reason why I want you to go into the comments and start commenting. It's because I want you to do that throughout this conversation. And I know if you're not with us live, that you can still do that, but I won't see them in the live moment. But if you're here with us live, I do want you to imagine that you're joining us for a cup of coffee, which means if you were joining my guest and I for a cup of coffee, if you had a question, you'd ask it. If you had a comment, you'd share it. If you had an idea, you'd offer it. And in person, you would just say it. But since you're not in person, you're on the computer. Typing is the way to do that. So if you will tell us where you're from, and then if you have comments, questions, and ideas, you'll share them. That would be fantastic. That will all make for a better conversation. It will make this more valuable for you because you're engaged and may even get your specific questions answered. And all of that will eventually make it a better podcast, right? Which is the other purpose. Like, this is being done live and will be available to people afterwards, again, on whatever social platform that you're on. But eventually, in this case, in about a month, it will be an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So all of what I've just said won't be on the podcast. So we're going to trim the audio and the video, starting in, Marissa, this is for you. 3, 2, 1. Leadership is a journey, and we will explore some of the steps on that journey today. Not all of us are on the same place on this journey, but the principles and practices that we'll talk about today apply to all of us, and that is our focus today. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live on your favorite social media channel. You can learn about how to do that and when those are happening, and interact with us and really get the information and inspiration sooner, because most of the time these happen live at least a month before they make it to the podcast. So you want to learn more about doing that, you can join our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just go to Remarkable Podcast/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all of that info, get the inside scoop, etc. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses, picked from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. You can learn more by going to remarkablemasterclass.com. And with that, let me bring in our guest, and then I will introduce him momentarily. And when I get the script back up in front of me so I can see it, which somehow it got lost. There it is. Our guest today is Dr. Scott DeLong. He is a serial entrepreneur who has built 3 previous companies from the ground up. The successful exit from each has positioned him to continue his thirst for knowledge and experience, and cultivated a return to the educational system, where he received not only a doctorate in leadership studies, but also taught courses in both communications and entrepreneurship at the university level. His book, I Thought I Was a Leader, A Journey to Building Trust, Leading Teams, and Inspiring Change, details his journey and explores the power of transformational leadership. And it is, in fact, the basis of our conversation today. He's also the co-host of the CEO Podcast, a bi-weekly show delving into the most important topics and issues facing today's business leaders. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate you having me on.
So glad to have you here. And again, if you're with us live, you can send us notes. So what do we got? We got someone here from Texas, and I know we've got a lot more of the folks than that. So if you've joined us late, you want to share a hello, we'd love to have it. But Scott, I want to dive in with a question that I almost always ask guests. And because this word is in the title of your book, maybe it's an especially interesting one today. But like, when you were a kid, you probably didn't figure that you'd be doing now what you're doing now. So just tell us a little bit at the very high level about the journey that leads you to doing the work that you do today and why it's important.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the question. A lot of this journey is detailed in the book. However, the title is really important to me, and I thought I was a leader because everywhere I went, whether it was on the baseball field, being named a captain, or in the business world, getting promoted young and becoming managers and vice presidents and things at a very early age, I always thought that I was in a leadership position. When I started my own companies, I always thought I was a great leader as well. There's a line in the book that, and I hope I'm allowed to say this, but I said, I thought I was a leader. It turns out I was just an asshole. And that goes back to some of the training that I got from my coaches and my first bosses, and where they were managers, and management was the way of going. Command and control leadership was really what it was all about. And those days are gone. I mean, they still exist, but they need to be gone because the future generations are going to require them to be gone. The kids today are not going to put up with that style of management. And I like to say, we manage processes, we manage projects. We need to lead people.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%, Scott. And the subtitle of the book does say a journey to building trust, leading teams, and inspiring change. And I want to talk about trust. So why does trust make that subtitle? And why is trust so important for us? So you just said that we need to lead people. So I think we can make that connection, but talk a little bit more about why trust is so important for us as leaders, wherever we are in our journey.
Great question. Because of this one statement that I like to make, is that I've never seen a positive human relationship unless trust has been developed first. So trust is paramount, whether it's in your personal relationships or your business relationships, whether they're with customers, whether they're with employees, whether they're with vendors. Without trust, all we can get is transactional relationships instead of transformational ones.
So I want to come back to that last point in a second, but talk to me about this, because leaders will say all the time, I'm sure you've heard it many times, you probably felt it yourself on your own journey, that, okay, I get that. That sounds good. Trust is important. Yeah. We got work to do. Like how do we remind ourselves and encourage others to recognize the value of this beyond the words and actually invest the time to build it?
Yeah, well, I think more and more work is being done by teams these days rather than the individual contributors just doing their thing and going at it. And when you get down to it, the thing that turns a group into a team, so there are several factors within that. I mean, certainly you have to have people with complementary skill sets, not exact skill sets, but complementary. So we need, as a baseball player, so we don't need 9 shortstops. We need a shortstop and a pitcher and a catcher and a first baseman and an outfielder, people that have some complementary skills in order to make that team work. We have to have a purpose. We have to have a unified purpose for the team to get together and to do the work together. We need processes in which this team can work. And here's 2 clues, and very important. We need a communication system, a communication process to support the business processes that we're working with. So that leads to trust. Without trust between and with team members, you will never have a true team. You may have a group of people working together, but if they don't trust each other, there is no way for them to develop into a team.
So you made that comment about not everyone can be a shortstop. My favorite basketball coach, which happens to be at my alma mater, Matt Painter, says, everyone wants to be the shortstop and bat leadoff, but you can't have that if you have a team. Okay. And so when you said that, it crossed my mind that I've heard Matt say that more than once. And by the way, everybody, I would love to have Matt on the show, and I haven't worked at making that happen, but I'm just stating that out loud that I want to have Matt Painter on the show someday. So if any of you listening or watching can help me make that happen, let me know. I haven't really tried yet, but Scott, I'm going to have that happen someday. So we're talking about trust, and in your book, you talk about something called the circle of trust.
Yeah.
So tell me about what that looks like and how that can be useful to us as leaders. Describe your circle of trust.
So a little backstory first is that the way trust is typically developed is that we do what we say we're going to do, and then we're going to do it again, and then we do it again, and we do it again. And it's a slow, arduous process in order to build trust in a typical style. What the circle of trust was developed for was a way to develop trust both faster and deeper than a typical style of building trust. There's only 4 steps to it, and they're simple, but they're not necessarily easy to deploy. The first one is starting with respect. And it's not the kind of respect that my dad taught me, is that respect is earned, it's not given. You have to do things to earn respect. I'm talking about a different level of respect. I'm talking about a respect for the humanity, for human dignity, to recognize the fact that I can learn something from every human being and they all have value. If we start there, we can enter into a conversation. The next step in the circle is a concept from Stephen Covey and his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and that is listening to understand. Where most of us listen to reply. You ask a question, you make a statement, and I can't wait to jump in. Now, we do it with good intentions. I'm jumping in because I'm trying to make a connection with you. But the problem is that I'm stepping on your story. I don't fully understand where you're coming from first, and now I'm getting in front of you. While I'm trying to make a connection, what I'm actually doing is going to be pushing you away because I'm not getting into your story. So listening to understand takes everything that it takes for active listening. We need to get good eye contact. We need to nod. We need to paraphrase. We need to give them a piece of what our understanding of what they're saying is. But there's one step that goes a little bit further, and this is really important. And that is to ask deeper questions about what you're talking about. And when I say deeper questions, I'm talking about open-ended questions. I'm talking about questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no. Yes or no questions end the conversation. Open-ended questions can get dialogue going. I just proved this the other day. I was with a group, and it wasn't an act. It was real because it has to be sincere. But there was a gentleman that I hadn't met before, and it was before the meeting started. And so I asked him about, one of his hobbies, and he happened to be in jiu-jitsu. And I'm not a jiu-jitsu guy, so I started asking him deeper questions about what you do in it, and why is it important to you, and tell me more, and can you help me understand? And I got through about 5 or 6 questions, and you could just see everybody at the table leaning in, just really engaged. And afterwards, I took a moment to talk to the group, and I said, Kevin, how do you feel about me right now? He goes, I'd love to have more conversation with you. This is great. Why? People want to talk about themselves. They want their story to come out. And if I show enough care to find out about their story, several things happen. One, I get smarter. I'm going to learn more information by going deeper. And that's great. Good for me. But 2, by showing that care, it draws people into me. And trust me, they will give you, most people will give you the time to talk about your story as well. If you're that interested in them, they are going to be interested in you, and you're going to get your turn, but don't rush to take your turn. Find out about others. Now, that is a super powerful way of building relationships, by caring, being interested instead of interesting.
Right.
The third step of the program of the Circle of Trust is something that we call share from experience. Sharing from experience is something I learned in a group called Entrepreneur Organization. And they used to have a protocol that we call Gestalt Language Protocol. They don't use that anymore. But basically what it says is that we don't give advice. At first, I hated that. I would get some advice from them. And he said, no, no, we don't do that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is, people only want your advice if you're confirming what they think anyway. And second, when you give them contrary advice, they don't take it. And all I'm going to do is get upset when they don't take my advice, my brilliant advice for them. Right. So what I learned to do is, as I learned to take the word should out of my vocabulary, unless I'm talking about myself. And I had to learn this the hard way. And what it took for me to do is to apply a term that I can't stand, arrogance, to the word should. I think it is arrogant of me Kevin, for me to tell you what you should do. I don't have your background. I don't have your experience. I don't have your knowledge, and I don't have your consequences.
And I certainly don't have the full context of the
Yeah,
situation. Right?
right. So how arrogant of me for me to tell you what you should do. So sharing from experience looks more like this. After fully listening to their story and trying to really understand from their point of view, not from mine, but from their point of view, sharing from experience would sound like, huh, I had a similar circumstance. Here's what happened to me. Here's how it turned out. But more importantly, here's how it felt. We don't use the word feelings in business very much. And I think that's a mistake. We all have them and they're real. And why avoid them? So telling somebody how those experiences felt may help them. It may. But what it does is by being a little vulnerable, it lets them into me as well. And vulnerability is part of trust, right? The classic definition of trust is being vulnerable to the actions of another. So I need to be a little vulnerable if I want people to trust. Now, the fourth step is just what we call deliver on the promise, which is the old school style of building trust, doing what you say you're going to do and doing it again and doing it again and doing it again, right? It's the fastest way to break trust by not honoring your commitments. And it's a slow, tedious way of just building it if you do it in isolation. So the circle of trust creates a system that you can build trust both faster and deeper. And what we found is that if we just go through that cycle 3 times with an individual, we can start building a different level of respect and therefore a relationship, and that relationship is built on trust.
And one of the things I would add, and you can comment on this, however, whether you agree or disagree, you can tell me, is that if we focus only on the delivering on what we promise, right,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the transactional level of trust, which is important.
Yeah.
If we only have that one, as you said, it's the easiest one to be broken. But if we're doing all 4 of these things regularly in the cycle, even when we do foul up because we're human, right, it's less likely to break trust entirely, because it's built on more than just delivering on what I said I'd deliver on.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we can't, now I make every attempt I can to deliver on my promise, but stuff happens, right? For instance, we were supposed to do this a couple of weeks ago, and all of a sudden I had an opportunity to go visit my daughter in South Carolina and couldn't be live with you.
So we rescheduled it.
I broke my promise, but I did what I could to reschedule it, to do what I can to make it okay for the other person. And you were gracious enough to be able to do that for me, and I appreciate it.
So one of the things that you spend a good bit of time talking about in the book that I think as leaders we have to focus on, and I think that often we don't spend enough time thinking about it in deep ways, and that is the role between us being a leader and what power means. And so what I really, you talk in the book about there being multiple different types of power, which I would agree with. And so really what I'd like to start with is what are the types of power that as leaders we often lean into, sometimes to our detriment, but like what are the sort of common kinds of power that we might be thinking about as leaders that might not help us the most?
Well, I think, and you can look at it 2 ways. You can look at it positional power or physical power. For instance, the United States has a lot of physical power because we've got a great military, right? Or the bully in the block has power because he could beat you up, right? So that's one type of power. But in the business world, we use positional power. I'm the boss because I said so. Do it my way. I know better than you know. And I come to find out that that's not always true. In fact, rarely true. There's oftentimes I get into companies and the CEO is dictating who buys what, and then they buy the broom for the janitor, right? Who knows better how to use that broom than the janitor? The CEO doesn't. So you go down to the level where the people know what they need and find out, rather than me asserting my authority over them. And that's an extreme example, there's janitor and the CEO certainly, but I'm talking about managers and directors and vice presidents and all those folks who are doing that job every day under current circumstances, not the circumstances the CEO did it 20 years ago when he was that level, he or
even 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
The world's changing so fast.
The
Exactly.
world is changing. So let the experts bring their expertise to bear. And now my power now changes to influence. I want to be able to influence people, to inspire. That influence is not manipulation. It is to inspire. The type of influence that I'm looking for is to inspire people, to help them want to do their best work. And my job comes back to providing them the tools for them to be able to do their best work, not tell them how to use those tools. Not necessarily. Maybe I might have some expertise on how to use the hammer or whatever tool we're talking about, but my real job is to provide them the resources and the tools so that they can do their work.
So shifting from, I think there you go. Oh, you froze for a second, but you're back. Shifting from positional power to the power of influence, for example, are there other sorts of power that maybe as leaders we don't think about enough? Like I think we're all pretty clear that we have positional power. That's a fact. But if we lean into it as the main or only type of power we work from, we're not going to be very successful. Are there other than sort of influence or inspirational power, anything else there that you want to highlight for us or make sure that we're thinking about?
I think I want to do it in reverse order. What I want to talk about is the detriment of using those positional powers and the coerciveness and the corrosion that happens when I use that. That's the thing that we leaders need to recognize, is that when we use that positional power or the authority power that comes from wherever, whether it's our physical strength or whether our position, it is coercive and it is corrosive. It tears down relationships instead of builds them up. And if the theories in my book are true, that our job as leaders is to build people up and to lead rather than do for them, right? Then what we want is people being their best. And we do that by assisting, providing them the resources, whether it's knowledge or other resources that we can provide. But the word empower is used a lot, but that's really what it gets down to, is to allow them the power to do their jobs.
Right. One of the statements that you make in the book, which is a statement that we talk about all of the time, which is the difference between, and you've just really said it without saying these words, and it's the difference between leading for compliance versus leading for commitment.
Yeah.
And that's literally what you've just been talking about.
Yeah.
And we frame it as a choice that we as leaders need to make. And rarely do I have a leader say, well, I just want to lead for compliance. Although, unfortunately, many are actually leading that way.
We act like it. We act like it,
even if we don't want it. So framing it that way, I obviously, one of the things we like about books is when people say things that we agree with. And so that's certainly something that you and I agree with. I want to go, if we're talking about power and we're talking about, I have the positional power, and we're talking about the fact that I've done these jobs, or I've been through all of the wars, and now I'm the leader, and now I'm maybe the CEO, or I'm the vice president, or whatever. And even if I'm just the frontline leader, right? One of the things we've always societally said we want from leaders, we want leaders to be confident. And yet one of the things that you talk about in the book is that we need to be humble. So talk about the role of humility and how it relates to us being more effective as leaders.
Yeah, well, there's three things in what we call principled leadership, humility being the first, empathy and vulnerability, that are not typical leadership type processes that people think about. But I think humility is a really important one. And I've got a friend of mine who was very humble leader. In fact, he said all the time, when I was first getting into the consulting with him, he would say the words, "I don't know," right? He'd throw out these things, and at the end of it, and I said, you got to stop saying that. You got to quit saying I don't know. And I was wrong. So I think not knowing is okay. Being humble enough. And I like, instead of I don't know, what I like to rephrase that now is to talk about an idea and then say, Kevin, what do you think? Right? Invite the conversation. I don't know may tell people that I'm not confident, and I'm fully confident. But if I say to you, I've got an idea, Kevin, what do you think? Like, that's an invitation to tell you that I can learn something from you. And I think that's what humility means to me. It doesn't mean what people normally think of, oh, please don't issue praise on me and all that kind of false humility that I've seen people do. But it is the fact that I can learn something from you, and I need to invite you into that conversation. To me, that's where the humility in leadership comes.
Yeah, what do you think is my favorite 4-word question, right?
Yeah.
And it is getting us at humility in that sort of way. So how do we walk the tightrope then, or the tensions between being confident and being humble?
Well, I think confidence comes from within. I've done what I've done. I am who I am. I've built that, and I feel pretty good about that. But I also need to recognize that I don't know everything, and I don't know the right way for everything. In fact, I used to say that, just do it the right way, right? That's out of my vocabulary as well. There might not be a right way. Now, certainly there's right and wrong, but I'm talking about a right way of accomplishing something. I might be able to do something in this fashion, or you can do it faster, better, cheaper using another fashion. Both gets us to the outcomes that we're looking for, getting the thing done. And it's not necessarily a right way or Scott's way.
Yeah. Yeah, I often frame it around what's the best way, which is different than the right way. Because right is like there's multiple good ways, better ways,
Sure.
effective ways. But if we try to get to right, especially when we are the leader with positional power, everyone thinks, oh, what he really wants is his way, to your point a
Yeah.
second ago.
Yeah.
You mentioned the three things in what you would call the principles of humility, empathy, and vulnerability. And I just
Mhm.
want to take a second. I'm looking at the clock here, and if we can talk about vulnerability just for a second,
Sure.
because I think you say this in the book. Certainly, it's true. I'm sure whether you said it or not, I know we would agree on this, and that is that this wasn't something anyone talked about when they were writing books, or they're doing the work that you and I do 15 years ago. Like,
Yeah.
this is a new word in the framework of what it means to be an effective leader. And so while we could probably have done the entire show on this word or this idea,
Mhm.
uh, give everybody sort of one thing. Like, maybe let's do it this way. From your perspective, what does it mean to be vulnerable, and help us as leaders understand why that's okay?
I'm going to go with the why it's okay first, because I believe this 100%. And um, I learned this through some of my journey. But what I found was that, and I didn't grow up with vulnerability at all. In fact, all three of these principles aren't things that I grew up with at all. But what I found about being vulnerable is it is the most attractive quality I can have. And what I mean by, it's not going to make me any better looking, or want people to whatever, but by being vulnerable, they lean in to me. Being vulnerable says, Kevin, I could use a little help. When I say that, unless you have antisocial personality disorder and you're a narcissist, a sociopath, or a psychopath, when I say, Kevin, I could use a little help, you lean in. What can I do for you? And if you can, you will, right? So when I say attracting, what I mean is it draws people to me by my vulnerability. And asking for help is not something that is easy for CEOs to do, especially those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s in the command and control style, where we were supposed to be this stoic, strong, confident person. But asking for help will get people to come to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. So, in in a 30-minute conversation, there's obviously all sorts of things I could have asked that I didn't. Is there one specific thing that you wish I would have asked? Or is there one specific thing, Scott, that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about briefly?
I think just the one thing is that my purpose, the reason that I do what I do, and from where I came from with this command and control leadership style, and most of the men of my generation, and I'm talking to the men of my generation here who grew up with those coaches that were always right, and we just did what they told us, and we got compliant, they got compliance from us or from their first leaders, is that there is a better way. There is a better way to lead. And the new generations that I hear so many complaints about, Gen Z and millennials and whatever their flaws that people make the assumptions that they are, that we need to think through that. They are not, if they represent more than 51% of our current workforce, I can make the assumption that they represent 51% of our customer base as well. We need these people. We need their thoughts, and we raise them to be who they are, right? Showing care and concern for their mental health and all the different problems that, you hear people talking about. We are the ones that need to make the changes. We, this older generation, needs to adjust to what the future looks like rather than hang on to our past. I wrote this book for people that looked like me and in my age bracket. And come to find out, it's the next generation below them are the ones that are resonating with it. They're saying, you're right. Hey, my dad's not going to change, or my CEO is not going to change. They're too close to retirement. It's too much work. And it is work. It is work. I've been on this journey for 14 years trying to become a better human and a better leader. And I'm not there yet. And I'm still working on it. So yes, it's work. And I'm going to tell you, it's worth it. It's worth it.
So that's some really good stuff. We've been talking with Dr. Scott DeLong, the author of the book, I Thought I Was a Leader, A Journey Toward Building Trust, Leading Teams, and Inspiring Change. And before we finish, Scott, I want to shift gears for a second and ask you a couple of other questions.
Yeah.
That would have been a really good way to end the podcast, but unfortunately, that's not where we're going to end.
Okay.
I want to ask you a very different kind of question. I want to know, Scott, what do you do for fun?
I play pickleball right now. I have gotten addicted to pickleball. I get up in the morning and I rush over to the court. I play for a couple hours, and I tell you what, I was a baseball player, and then it turned into tennis, and my body's falling apart, and I've got 2 new knees and all that. But pickleball is a game I can play, and I tell you what, just the camaraderie on the court. I'm playing doubles, so there's 4 people. I get to meet new people. People are smiling, having a great time. That's what I do for that, and travel. I like to travel as well. But my daily routine surrounds pickleball today.
And something else that I know we have in common is reading, and which is pretty much always true for my guests on the show. And I did tell you I was going to ask you this question, and I'm excited for you to share the book because it's a book that I've read as well. So Scott, what are you reading? And I think in this case it's rereading, but what are you reading right now?
So it's rereading. You're right. There's one of my favorite authors, someone that and that has been around for decades, Tom Peters, who's recently retired, but Tom Peters wrote a series of books. Search for Excellence was his first one that really hit the charts. But this was the first book, Thriving on Chaos, that I ever read. I was 27 years old, and I found this book, and I read through it, and then I got an opportunity to get a promotion for a company on the East Coast that I was working with. I was a regional sales manager, West Coast regional sales manager at the time. And the president wanted me to come and help him. He was working in this family business. And I said, I'll move. I'll come there. I'll take your vice president title. And again, I was only 27 years old. And this guy's been in business doing business for 27 years, right? And I said, under one condition, you read this book first. So it was that powerful for me. First thick business book that I ever read, right? And then, and now I go back, and anything I see from Tom, whether it's, old tweets or things like that, I just like, this guy was like, if I knew him, if I had a mentor, he'd be it. So Thriving on Chaos. It's a handbook for the management revolution. And we used to use the word management. That's what it was back then. And the revolution is leadership.
And we'll make sure in the show notes we'll put connections to the 2 times that Tom has been on the show. And as I told Scott before we started, they were personal highlights for me.
Yeah, it would be
to do
for
that.
me
So Scott, before we go, there's a question that I know you would like me to ask, which is, where can people learn more about your work, get a hold of the book? I've shown it a couple of times, but where do you want to point people? Where do you want people to go to learn more about you, your work, and the book?
So you can go to a couple of places. My company is Lead to Goals, LEAD, the number 2 goals.com. But you can get to me at scottdelong.net. But if you want to engage in a conversation, email me. I respond to every legitimate email that I receive. And it's just Scott at leadtogoals.com. And I will answer questions. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. I get and working with people and helping people if I can, or at least providing my thoughts. Right. I think, when I work as a coach, I think there's 3 things that a coach can help, an executive do. One, it can help them reframe the issue, because we get blinders on and we don't always see. The second one is can challenge your assumptions, because not everyone will challenge your assumptions if you're the boss.
Right.
And the third thing that an executive coach can do is hold you accountable, because people don't do that either to their boss. Right. So I love the coaching work because I get to do those 3 things with other smart, powerful people. I get to learn in the process as well. And that's what's fun for me.
So lead to the number 2 goals.com, Scott at lead2goals.com. And if you want to find Scott on any of the social media channels, lead numeral 2 goals, and you'll find him in all of those places. Hope you'll do that. We'll put all that in the show notes as well. But now I have a question for all of you before we finish. It's the question I ask every single episode. It's my favorite 2-word question. We talked earlier about my favorite 4-word question. Here's my favorite 2-word question. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of the time that we've spent together? What ideas are you going to translate into action? What things did Scott say, or did you think of as we were talking, that would make a difference for you? Because if all you do is consume this content, listen to this or watch us, and not take any action, then it will have been of far less value than it would have otherwise, right? So maybe there's something about humility, something about confidence, something about power, something that we talked about, that something about trust that you want to take action on. Maybe you want to start employing the circle of trust. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that there is a what, and that you take action on it. Scott, thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. I'm so glad that you joined us today and that we were able to make this happen.
That's been great, Kevin. I love the conversation. So thank you for having me on.
It was my pleasure. And so if this is the first time that you've joined us on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, make sure you come back. If you're watching us on one of the social platforms, live or later, and you didn't know about the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, you can learn more by going to any of your favorite podcast platform, or go to remarkablepodcast.com to get all of the information. And we're doing this every week, and we'll hope that you'll be back with us next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.